Hi guys, this is your girl Wakeji Kamore and welcome to Reflections by Wakeji Kamore. It is good to be back. Today we are going to be looking at Ezra chapter 5. I know the whole of last week I went quiet. Honestly, I was at a state where I was feeling very discouraged, very angry. I was feeling very angry at just the state of this country, the state of how funds are being used. Honestly, I was just feeling angry. Nilikuwa tu nasikia nimekasirika. I was feeling helpless. I was feeling like, now what can we do? What is there anything that we can do to stop this? But I thank God because there's always hope. So long as the Lord is all at the throne, there is always hope. There is definitely always hope. So I'm encouraged and I am back. And we're going to be looking at Ezra chapter 5. And again, as you know this, please, if you haven't read this chapter for yourself, please just pause this recording and read the chapter for yourself so then you understand what's happening in this chapter. And then you can come back and listen to the summary that I have to give and just the lessons that I have picked up from this chapter. In chapter 4, the last chapter that we looked at, there was a lot of opposition that Zerubbabel, the leader, and the people that were reconstructing the temple, rebuilding the temple, were facing. And the outcome of that opposition was a decree from the king of Persia at that time, who was Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes had said, no more building of that temple, hiyo kitu iachiwe tu hapo and nobody should rebuild it. So between that time to when we are looking at chapter 5, there's a whole period that has gone past. It's about like 18 years between chapter 4 and chapter 5, and the construction of the temple has been halted for a whole 18 years. But in chapter 5, we see that the construction of the temple continues even before the decree was lifted. And this is what happens. There's a prophet that comes into the picture called Haggai and also Zechariah, and they come and prophesy, or rather encourage. I think it was more encouragement than prophecy, but anyway, it's prophesying. They came and prophesied to Judah and to Jerusalem, and the result of that prophecy is that Zerubbabel and Joshua, son of Jozadak, started to rebuild the house of God again. They started to rebuild the temple again, even if the decree of King of Persia was still in place. So I feel like this prophecy was such an encouragement for them. There must have been something that they were told that gave them such courage to start rebuilding this thing, even if the decree of the king was still at place. And so what happens that when they are building, there's a guy called Tattenai. Tattenai was a governor of Trans-Euphrates, and he came to them and said, who authorized you guys to rebuild this temple and to finish it? And then they also asked, who are the names, give us the names of the people who are constructing this building. But because the eye of the Lord was watching over the elders of Jewish, they were not stopped until a report could go to Darius and his written reply be received. So who is Darius? When King Artaxerxes died, the next king was King Darius, and King Darius was now the king of Persia. And so this Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, he comes to Zerubbabel and is like, hey, mbona mnaendelea kujenga hii kitu? I thought we were to stop building this thing. Why are you still continuing to building this thing? And they were like, give me the names of the people that are building. But it looks like even just the fact that there's someone who's trying to oppose them did not deter them and did not stop them from continuing to build this temple. So this is what happens. Tattenai writes a letter to King Darius to just tell him the people who are building this thing, and it seems like awaachi kuribiliki tu. But I like the letter. And let me just read the letter. It says, to King Darius, cordial greetings. The king should know that we went to the district of Judah to the temple of the great God. The people are rebuilding it with large stones and placing the timber in the walls. The work is being carried out with diligence and is making rapid progress under their direction. We questioned the elders and asked them, who authorized you to rebuild this temple and to finish it? We also asked them for their names so that we could write down the names of the leaders for your information. This is the answer they gave to us. We are the servants of God, of the God of heaven and earth. We are rebuilding the temple that was built here many years ago, one that a great king of Israel built and finished. But because our ancestors angered the God of heaven, he gave them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar the Chaldean, king of Babylon, who destroyed the temple and deported the people to Babylon. However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house of God. He even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to the temple in Babylon. Then King Cyrus gave them to a man named Sheshbazzar, who had been appointed governor, and told him, "Take these articles and go and deposit them in the temple of Jerusalem and rebuild the house of God on its site." So this Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. From that day to the present, it has been under construction, but it's not yet finished. Now, if it pleases the king, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem. Then let the king send us his direction in this matter. And that is the end of that chapter. And one of the things that I learned from this chapter, there are quite a couple, but one of the things that I learned is that the truth will always defeat the false things, or rather will always defeat lies. What we see happening in chapter 4 is that these people who are opposing the construction of the temple wrote to King Artaxerxes, and whatever they wrote was lies, because what they basically said, or rather they were inciting the king and telling him, if this thing is built here, these guys are going to go against you. They're not going to pay tribute, so you should not allow this thing to be built here. And then they also wrote on that letter and said that you should check your records to see that these Israelites were disobedient to the other kings that were there, and that is the reason why they were destroyed. Though that was actually a lie, it was just part of the truth, because at the end of the kingdom of this southern kingdom, Judah, at the end there was a time when they would be exiled. A little bit of them would be exiled, and then other people would be put there, and governors would be appointed by the people of Babylon, by the king of Babylon, and then those governors would go against the king of Babylon, and then they would be removed. So when they were writing this letter, they were referring to that almost like the very end of the southern kingdom. They were not referring to, they didn't check all the other years and what had happened in all the other years. They completely just magnified on this one specific instant where the Israelites, or rather the governors that had been appointed by the king of Babylon, were not paying their dues and they were not paying the taxes that they were supposed to pay. But they took that small lie and they magnified it, and they made the king of Persia to think, or to agree with them, that if this temple was rebuilt, that it wasn't going to, these people are going to be rebellious, and they are going to be people that the king of Persia could not control. But they did not tell the king, oh, by the way, you should also check your records to see that actually the king that was before you had given them a decree to actually come and build this temple. They left that information out. The only thing they told the king to search, you say, search your archives and see that these Israelites were actually rebellious. And that is the information that was found. But in chapter 5, when this letter is written, I like the fact that the truth has now been revealed, that these guys are not just rebuilding this temple from their own, thinking. They had been given a decree and permission to come back and to rebuild this temple by the king of Persia, who was Cyrus at that time, King Cyrus at that time. And I mean, that decree must have been in the archives, but it seemed to not have been given to the kings that were after that, until Darius was told, search your archives and you will see that decree that King Cyrus gave for this temple to be rebuilt. So one of the things that I learned is the truth will always defeat lies. The truth will definitely always defeat lies, which is really, really good. The other thing I learned in this chapter is that God's word and instruction will always beat man's command. These guys, after Haggai and Zechariah, the prophet, came and started to prophesy for them, they immediately caught the word of God and started rebuilding, or rather went back to rebuilding the temple, even if they had halted for a whole 18 years. So it shows that whatever it is that these prophets came and told them must have been an instruction from God to allow them to go back and start rebuilding this temple, even if they had stopped for a whole 18 years, even if there was a decree on the ground that had told them to stop building this temple. So God's commands, God's instructions always beats man's command. So ask yourself which one it is that you put priority over. Is it something that someone has said, or is it what God has told you to do? Another thing that I just speak from this is that sometimes prophecy will come as encouragement, and people will come as encouragement in your life to just encourage you to continue doing the things that you are doing. Maybe you had stopped, and my prayer is that encouragement and prophecy will come to us at a time when we feel low, defeated, and discouraged. The other thing I realized is that when the enemy chooses to lie to us, or rather to deceive us, he picks part of the truth that seems to be off. Like, he picks part of it and magnifies it, and the part that he magnifies is always the negative part. He picks that and he magnifies it, and now he makes you feel like God doesn't love you. He makes you feel like you're a failure. He makes you feel like maybe you can't even do this. He makes you feel like now you have walked so far away from God, you can't go back. Like, he picks something that is true, a little bit true, always at the negative, and then he magnifies it. When you look at when the first time we see the instance of Satan in the form of a snake speaking to Eve, and the first things that he says, he picks a little bit of the truth, he twists it and magnifies it. And this is what he says to Eve. The first thing that Satan says to Eve in the Garden of Eden, he says, did God really say you must not eat from any trees in the garden? We know that that's a lie. We know that there's a part of it that God said, do not eat from this tree, this one tree that was in the middle of the garden. That was the only tree that God had said, don't eat from it. But when Satan is telling this thing to Eve, he's like, did God really say that you must not eat from any tree in the garden? So he takes the truth, twists it, and then magnifies it and just makes it look like enyewe kwani God anakaja anasemaje tusikule kutoka kwa hizi miti. Like, he just twists the truth and magnifies the negative part. The same thing that had happened in chapter 4, where the people who were opposing the rebuilding of the temple took part of the truth. At the end of the southern kingdom, at the end of Judah, where the governors that were appointed by Babylon were rebellious against Babylon, that's what they took, and they magnified it to the king of Persia at that point and told them, see, this is what these guys did. So they will be rebellious, and so you shouldn't allow them to build the temple. That is how the devil deceives. You're having a bad day. He takes that one bad day and magnifies it and makes it look like your whole life is such a horrible life. You're having one problem. It can be just one single problem. He takes it, he magnifies it, and he makes it look like now you cannot even proceed with life. Like, life is so hard, it's unbearable. He makes it look like there's no solution for whatever problem it is that you're going through. That is how the enemy deceives us. And my prayer is that we would be quick to see and to be able to just tell when the enemy is magnifying something small. One of the things that I like to say is that the devil is a liar. He has no bone of truth in him. There is no truth in him. So whatever it is that he's telling you, at least the first thing that you should do, that this baseline, this is a lie. So find that lie and just be like, yeah, the devil is saying I can't make it. That is a lie. So it must be that I can make it. It must be that I can be successful. It must be that I will be healed. It must be, whatever it is that the enemy is telling you is definitely a lie. One of the things that I also realized from this chapter, there's a lot of lessons that I picked from this chapter, is that this letter that was written to King Darius by the governor Tattenai would not have been written if these guys did not almost like go against the decree of man to continue rebuilding this temple. If Tattenai didn't come and find these guys continuing to rebuild the temple, even if there was a decree at place that said don't continue with that construction, then the letter to Darius would not have been written. If these guys actually were overwhelmed by fear and allowed fear to be overwhelming for them, and allowed themselves to say, oh, we are afraid of Persia and what they will do, and the king of Persia and what he will do when he finds out that we are still rebuilding. If these guys did not find encouragement from the prophecy of Zechariah and Haggai, they wouldn't have gone back to rebuilding this temple. And if they hadn't gone back to rebuilding this temple, the governor Tattenai would not have found them. And if the governor Tattenai had not found them, he wouldn't have written this letter to Darius. And in the next chapter, we will see just how great this letter was and what the response was. It was such a good response, and it brought in so much blessings for just the fact that this letter was written, and only because these guys defied the decree, listened to the word of God and the prophecy that was coming from these prophets, and went back to rebuilding the temple and did not allow fear to incapacitate them. So, reflection for the day. Are there things that you're allowing fear to overwhelm you? Are there things that you know God has told you to do and you are so afraid to even take the first step? My encouragement would be, take the first step, and then you will realize just how God is just waiting for you to just take that step of faith. God is just waiting for you to just take that step of faith. And we will see it in chapter 6 about just the things that happen after these guys have taken the step of faith. This letter has been written, and we will see Darius's response to that letter. Thank you so much for listening, and see you tomorrow.